Hey, welcome back. It's kind of a gray Saturday night. We've got some twisters rolling through, I guess. So says Ryan Hall, y'all. uh, I wanted to go and start reading some of my Philippine stuff. I got taken home, as it were, last week with that earthquake down in Dajangas. To all you people, it's General Santos City, but to us, it's Dajangas. Jangas for short. I wrote somewhere in something that it's only General Santos City if you're looking at it from the outside. At any rate, uh, this is the first piece of fiction that I published ever back in 2019 or so, when I really, sort of hunkered down and went after it with some intent. This piece is based on the island of Boracay in the year before it was electrified. So there were only 4 generators on the island, no cement, touristy buildings to speak of. Everything was cocoa lumber. Expat backpackers, Israeli veterans. One old German guy who had a lending library where you could go. You could either trade a book and leave it with get a little receipt, or you could leave a deposit and take books out. One little hut where you could get a milkshake. They had one of the coveted generators on the island to run their mixer. It was crazy, wonderful. You had to carry little kerosene lanterns around at night. It was dark sky and the stars were insane. And the fireflies stayed lit for 20 seconds at a time. If you go look at film footage of Boracay now, it looks like, I don't know, Ocean City, Maryland, better palm trees. It's sad. It brought me to tears immediately. And then I went and sadly researched some of the recent history about Boracay. How I guess Duarte threatened to shut it down just as an island, shut the whole operation down after they electrified, I guess, the year after I was there in 92. They made no accommodations for waste when they went through their big explosive, growth and opportunity piece, and decided that the reef was as good a place as any to dump all the garbage that the tourists were making. So you can go out there today and watch these, Shargal girl type tourists complain about the local boys incessantly hounding them to buy shells, and they don't know that we just want to be left alone. Yeah. So this is a glimpse of Boracay in 91. My Boracay. A common courtesy. The man had been dragged into some scrub brush and rolled against a sandbank at a low point on the beach beneath a stand of high crooked coconut palms, a few hundred yards south of Club Basura, close to the Beachcomber bar. At first, the boys thought the man was sleeping. He looked peaceful, as if he were dreaming of something pleasant. As they got close, they saw the faint dark rust stains on his shirt, and where his chest was exposed, the ragged little holes. Pataina, said Bobong, the eldest. He's dead. Oh, said Boyet. It's bad luck to stay here, he said. Better that we never saw it. The man was pale and had blonde hair and was quite tall and fat. He wore only a floral print button-down shirt and a pair of ragged khaki shorts with a lot of pockets in them. One by one, the boys leaned over him. One by one, each watched his tiny inverted reflection rise in the dark small mirror of the dead man's eyes. They saw the deep brown stains made by the blood that had soaked into the chalk white sand where his chest and stomach were exposed. A light breeze caught the cowlick on the dead man's skull. Americano, Kini, he said. Hindi, said Bobong, shaking his head. Bobong was Boyet's older brother. He was very dark-skinned, and his eyes were the color of the waves on the sand at high tide. Australian seguro? Ambutlang, he said. He looks more Australian. The breeze moved over them and through the canopy of coconut palms high overhead. In the distance, a coconut fell to earth. They could feel it land through the soles of their feet. Another fell, and then another. And then the breeze died, and the beach became quiet again. Toward Apu Point, they could see the first fishing boats returning from the deep water past the reefs. In the foreground, vendors opened their tindahans and carandarias along the north side of the island. Some of them lit fires to cook rice for breakfast. Americanoni, said Bobong. Australians are not so fat. Bobong reached one leg forward hesitantly and touched the body with his big toe. He pushed, and the body budged a little. When it moved, it made a wet, sucking sound like the sound of an old man eating durian. The corpse was already beginning to stink. The breeze changed, and Bobong covered his nose. Crabs would gather soon. So would other creatures, dogs, carrion birds, black flies. All of them would visit for Marienda before the sun fell back into the sea. Bisag unsa patay na siya, he said. Whatever he is, he's dead. Let's search his pockets, Lito, one of the younger boys, said. Boy began to walk away from the man in the direction of Apu Point. Go ahead, he said, and he kept walking without looking back. The others followed him, walking in line, oldest to youngest. The air was cool and clean and smelled like flowers and sea salt. Now and then they could smell the sweet scent of rice cooking, the carandarias along the beach, and the smell of copra smoldering under skewers of pork and chicken. Mostly they smelled the big salty winds that rubbed the palm fronds high above them down the narrow ribbon of talc white sand in the shade. The brothers had a small skiff that they stashed among the rocks on the far side of the little cave that lay among the rocky cliffs at the western edge of the island, beneath the mountains that rose above Apu Point, and from it they fished for big tuna and for lapu-lapu that flashed like shiny new coins in the deep blue water off the edge of the reefs that ran a half a mile or so out from the edge of the beach. They used homemade spear guns, diving deep for minutes at a time without any tanks. Then there was always the nervous time between spearing a big fish and getting it to the surface before the sharks came. It was mako water and sometimes tiger shark water, and at high tide the barracuda swam right up to the reef, to the beach near Happy Home, where beautiful, well-oiled, linen-draped turistas reclined on rattan divans, sipping champagne at sunset. By high noon, the boys had taken one small fat tuna and two good-sized lapu-lapu. Then they hoisted the makeshift anchor and rowed for shore in the rising tide above the gathering sharks. On their way in, they crossed the path of a big motorized outrigger, one of the ones that brought turistas from Panay every day in the morning and at noon. And the turistas took pictures and waved at the boys, who stopped rowing to brace against the coming wave and to wave back. On shore, Boyet and Bobong dragged the skiff up the hot sandy cove to the little rocky hollow where they hid it in the evenings. The younger boys trailed behind them, laughing and tumbling on the sand in the crystalline blue shallows. I bet we get 40 pesos for the lapu-lapu, says Bobong. We'll be lucky to get 15 for both, Boyet said, and then, after a thoughtful pause, but there are more where that came from. He grinned and winked, and they all laughed together and began to walk back up the beach toward Beachcomber and Basura and the other smaller tourist restaurants, beachside cafes like Happy Home and Bistro, where they already had a buyer for their catch. And we'll get a good price for the junior either way, he said. 30, Marsing said. At least, said Lito. More like 40, Bobong said. More like 50, Boyet said. When they came back to the place on the beach where they had discovered the dead man, they found that he was gone. All that remained of him now was the dark stain of his blood on the sand, the faint lingering odor of death, and the angry hum of a great cloud of black flies. The boys stopped in the shade near the blood and looked at one another in disbelief. The flies lifted into a humming swarm above the sand and settled again. Boyet looked out at the beach. Turistas had begun to gather in the chairs on the sand near the beachcomber. Children moved among them, peddling small bottles of coconut oil and handmade coral necklaces and shells gathered from the reefs close to shore. Asa Mancha, said Bobong, shaking his head. Where did he go? He shrugged and looked at the others. Maybe he was discovered, offered Marsing. Maybe somebody else discovered him and called the police. Marsing was the youngest among them, but also the biggest, and sometimes the smartest. Maybe he was eaten by the flies already, said Bobong, or the flies carried him away. That seemed the most reasonable explanation. Boyet nodded. He looked at Bobong and nodded again, and Bobong nodded. The flies lifted into a buzzing cloud above the sand and settled again. And one by one the boys walked back up the beach, past the beachcomber, Club Basura, toward the village. Before they went home, they stopped at Bistro, where the turistas ate with silverware by candlelight, and they sold the fish they caught to their Uncle Dodo, the cook, whom they found cooking rice and preparing vegetables in the garden kitchen behind the restaurant. He bought their tuna for 50 pesos, and he bought the lapu-lapu for 20 each. The boys told Dodong about the dead man, and he nodded and said that the man was a turista who had insulted one of the Choi boys at Club Basura. The turista had spilled the Choi boy's beer, and then had refused to replace it. It is a common courtesy to replace it, said Dodong, but he didn't even offer. He didn't even apologize either. He just waved his hand and laughed and walked away. Dodong shook his head and spat into the coals. The Choi boys caught him walking home down the beach later on, and they beat him with cockfighting barbs tied to their fists like this, Dodong said, demonstrating with a paring knife. He bled out on the beach. They're still searching for the ones who did it, but they're probably in Cebu by now, he said. He shrugged, smiling. Okay lang. After all, it's a common courtesy. Everyone knows that. Better not to drink if you can't hold your rum. With that, he deftly cut along the belly of the tuna and then, with a flick of his wrist, gutted it and threw its entrails into the fire, where they hissed and smoked and bubbled into fat and melted away down the coals. Then Dodong grinned at the boys, and he reached for one of the lapu-lapu and repeated the process. The veins and organs popped and hissed into the coals and vanished in a tiny whorl of black smoke. The boys thanked their Uncle Dodong, and they left the beach and walked inland toward the village. Bobong said, How is it fair that we give him the lapu-lapu for 20 pesos when he will cook it in a little oil at Salamansi and sell it for 3 times that in an hour from now? Boyet shrugged. That is the price at Bistro, he said. Dodong can charge them more because he cooks them, and he has a place for them to eat the fish with a view of the water. You don't even have a comfortable box to sit on. The boys laughed, except for Bobong. It made no sense to him, but he nodded anyway. It was getting hot, and it felt good to finally be inland again, beneath the trees on the loam in the deep shade of the forest. When they came to the village, the boys divided the money equally among the 4 of them, and Bobong and Boyet accepted a small tax from the others for the use of their skiff. Then the boys all parted ways, and each went home for merienda and a nice long siesta before dinner. It was just hot enough not to be able to sleep. Boyet and Bobong watched the silvery waves that were made on the ceiling by the sunlight reflected from the ripples on the water in their mother's laundry pail outside. And they listened to her voice, deep and sweet and knowing, singing softly, rising and falling on its own inner tidal clock. They could barely hear the words she sang. Mostly they heard the warbling melody of her voice, this gentle music drifting through the open window with the scent of fresh papaya blossoms, as they each fell into a shallow, troubled sleep and dreamed of leviathan sharks and dead turistas. And thanks for joining me for another episode of Stories with Dave.